So we have some night vision today falling from the sky, and it's going to be the Jerry-31 from InfiRay. Now, for those who don't know, InfiRay, if you're into the night vision or thermal world, is a pretty huge name. They make thermals for both themselves and tons of other brands as well. They're really well known for their Ricoh series, the MH25, the RH25, the P Falcon, so on and so forth. A lot of these optics actually have been battle tested, so they're really well known for thermals. However, they're relatively new to the world of night vision. Now, the J31 or the Jerry-31 has been for sale for a while in Europe, but it's pretty new to the North American market. With things going up, such as tube prices, we wanted to bring something to the market that offers a good goggle that is feature-rich for a decent price point. If you go on our website now, this is probably going to be the cheapest binocular out there, as well as the Jerry-14, which is the monocular version of that. Video coming up shortly, if it's not already on our channel, is going to be the cheapest monocular. And they do come with some trade-offs, but they also come with a ton of features. Now, full disclosure, these goggles are not actually assembled by us like the PVS-14s are, RDVGs, various Nocturne and LLI products. They're made by InfiRay, but we do the final QC on them to make sure that you get them. They're going to be properly collimated. They're going to come with a custom and better fitting dovetail, and they're going to be clean and purged and all that good stuff so that you, the customer, can get a really nice goggle that meets the Cold Harbor standards. So once you get these goggles, unlike other goggles, they're actually going to come in their own little box here, which is actually pretty nice. This is just a sleeve that carries the box inside, and that's just going to be the cardboard. So inside the box, you're going to get this green and tan carrying case. Now, it doesn't have any MOLLE on it, so you can't mount this to your gear, although I'm not sure why you'd want to because it's pretty big. It's going to have a carrying handle, kind of like a GameCube, if you remember what that thing is. And it also has a buckle that opens it up like that. And it has Velcro here if you want to put your morale patch on there. On the top compartment over here, when you open it up, when you get it new, it'll come with a bunch of paperwork. I took it out already. It comes with a manual. It'll come with a certificate of authenticity with your serial number and QC on it. And it will also come with individual spec sheets for the tube. Inside, you're also going to find a few accessory packs. One of them will contain 2 of these Jerry C mounting pieces. And what's really nice about this goggle is they can actually integrate with a Jerry C, which is the clip-on thermal imager, out of the box. Now, it doesn't come with one, but it has a really sleek mounting mechanism because they're all designed by InfiRay, so they kind of want to keep within that Jerry ecosystem. To attach this on, you simply just screw it to these 2 plates at the bottom of the unit, and then you clip the Jerry on. Now, you get 2 of those. I don't know why you'd run 2 Jerrys. You usually only want to run 1, but if you have that option and you lose one, you're good to go. Another thing to note is inside you'll also get the dovetail over here. Now, this is actually the stock dovetail that it comes with. We upgraded all of our units with a different dovetail, a CHS custom dovetail, because we find that the stock dovetail can have some fitment problems on certain mounts. So we have a G69 here, nice, and we also have a LW NVM. And in this case, the dovetail, sometimes the stock dovetail that is, has a hard time attaching because of these rubber pads. Now, it does reduce the amount of wobble, but you need to really push the goggle in and just have the dovetail here. So I don't even have the fulcrum of the goggle to put in. And in some cases, the user doesn't push it in all the way and the goggle falls out. So it doesn't really matter if it, reduces the slack, if it's really hard to get into place anyways. We replaced this with a custom-made CNC'd aluminum Cerakoted dovetail made to spec, and it fits perfectly. No problems with the Argus or the G69, and obviously the Cadex is great because it's infinitely adjustable dovetail. If you do want to use the stock mount, we include it, but we have our CHS dovetail installed. Inside, you're also going to find these rubber eye caps. They come installed with these stock rubber bumper rings. You can have this on here and it hides the glow of the nod from any opposing force, I guess. And then we're going to get to the goggle itself, which looks a lot like any articulating goggle really, except it has a few small differeces. The goggle is fully made out of polymer. It interfaces with the dovetail. There's a few specs that InfiRay lists for the weight. The manual says 500 grams. Their manual online says 460 or something like that. And in reality, it's somewhere in between. It's like 470, 480 grams, depending on the devices and batteries and stuff like that you put in it. So it is a pretty lightweight goggle. It's also really small. So if you see this goggle, it's kind of running these tiny optical pods over here, and the goggle itself is really tiny. It can fit in the entirety of my hand over here. It's a very small goggle, which is nice. Lower profile, less head strain, less mass in front of your head is always a good thing. So let's go front to back on the features of this goggle. In the front, you'll notice these 2 day caps over here. They also have little pinholes in them. So if you wanted to have infinity focus, use these nods in brighter light conditions, you can flip it up and you can still see through them. I'll show you that right now. You can still see through them like that. They're still on. If you want to cover it up for a daylight cover, you can just put a piece of electrical tape on it, and that'll help you out a bit. So that goes over the infinity caps. They flip down or they can flip up. So if you're running a COTI at the bottom, you might want to flip it up. It works both ways. And they're also integrated into the nod. In the front over here, you'll have a battery cap, and it actually takes a AA battery, which is nice. In the front here, you might also notice these two emitters. Well, one of them is an emitter and one of them is actually a light sensor. So I believe this one is going to be the light sensor and this one is going to be the emitter. So this is an IR emitter. It works very simply. You just press and hold this. You'll see a red light in the right tube and the IR emitter will be on. So if you need an IR illuminator for whatever reason, you can just turn it on to see a little bit more in super dark conditions. And the light sensor tells it not to shut off when it's super bright out. That is a programmable feature, so you can turn it off. I personally turn it off. I'll show you how in the programming section of this video, but it's a light sensor. It's a cool feature. Now, I want to get to one thing that I really love about this nod, and that's going to be the power knob. And I wish more night vision had this UI because it's dead simple to use. One thing I notice when I hand off a new night vision device to somebody, they sometimes have to fiddle with it, how to turn it on, how to get the IR illuminator work and all that stuff. For this device, it's actually really easy. It's a manual gain device, which is pretty great. You can control the brightness on it, and you turn this knob, and then you turn it more to get more gain, just like a volume button. So if you see over here, I can turn the knob like that, and the gain goes down all the way to off, and then you unclick it from that detent, and then it increases in gain, it's max gain, and like I said, you could turn the gain down. So adjustable gain and that volume knob UI, fantastic, awesome. Moving on to the sides over here, you'll have IPD stops. So some nods don't have IPD stops. I don't think they're necessary if you have a really stiff IPD like the RNVG where you can just have it there and it stays in place. But for nods that have a bit of a looser IPD like these guys, it's nice to have so that way you can have a really good return to your eyes. And they actually are fairly stiff, which is nice. Some IPD knobs are really loose. You can loosen that up a bit and it should go back to where my eyeball is. Moving on to the rear, you're gonna have your diopters. So for those that don't know nods, most nods have adjustable diopters, so you can just adjust that to your vision. So if you don't want to wear your glasses or contacts, you can use your nods without it. Or if your eyes change when you get older, which is a nice feature. The rear of this knob actually has these two aluminum bridges on it that hold the pods in place. There are going to be these little retention rings on the rear over here. So if you wanted to put a split ring in there, or if you wanted to ratchet it to your helmet's elastic system, you totally could, which I do recommend in order to keep your nod retained in case something happens or bumps your mount. The top, like I said earlier, is going to have our dovetail, and then the rear over here actually has a little connection port. So you pull this out, you can hook a battery pack. We don't include it. It's the specific Jerry-31 battery pack for it with their cable, and you can get external power. On a single AA battery, this thing runs for about 20 hours, which is already pretty impressive. But if you do want that extra juice and you don't want to have to worry about switching batteries, you know, if you're running this continuously for a few days at a time, you can get a battery pack and that boosts your battery life up to about 80 hours, which is insane. The unit is also IP67 waterproof. So if you dunk this in water or you get some splashes on it, you don't have to worry about that. So let's get into programming this nod. One of the features that it's not going to have out of the box is actually going to be individual pod shutoff. And that's really easy to program on. So right now, if I rotate this goggle up, it's not going to turn off. Same thing with this. If you do want to enable it, it's really easy. All you do is you tap the power button 3 times really quick. 1, 2, 3. And in your right eye, you will see a blue light blink slowly twice, which means it's on. If it blinks 2 times fast, that means it's off. Just refer to the manual if you get confused. But now the individual pod shutoff is on. So if I rotate this, it'll turn off, and I rotate this, it'll turn off, which is a nice feature to have if you want to protect your tubes or prevent splashback on your helmet. Now there is one caveat to this, which I'm not a big fan of. So InfiRay, if you're watching this video, if you can make this feature separate to program, that'd be great. Might be a benefit to some people, but if you rotate this up like this, you'll notice the goggles are off. And if you rotate it down, I can probably show you like this, you'll notice the goggles are on. That can be a good thing if you're trying to protect your goggles and you don't want to fiddle around with the power knob all the time. But if you are looking up like that, sometimes, rarely, sometimes, you have to be looking pretty far up, the goggle can turn off on you, which is kind of annoying. So if you're doing some hiking and stuff with that and your eyes are mostly, you know, I would say within a pretty good range, like normal human range of looking, you'll be fine. But if you're doing a lot of weird stuff where you're looking up ladders or you're looking straight up, there's a potential the goggles can just shut off on you. So that's something to keep in mind. As well, if you're just fiddling around with the goggle and you turn it on while you hold it down like this, so I'm gonna turn it on while you're holding it down like this. As you can see, the goggle right now is off until you rotate it. So just because you turn it on when you're looking down at it like this and you enable that feature, it doesn't mean the goggle's broken. It just means that the accelerometer is detecting that the goggles is pointed in a vertical orientation. Overall, I don't think it's a really big deal. I would probably still turn the auto pod shut off, individual pod shut off on, just because it's a nice feature to have to protect your tubes. And honestly, for most normal usage, you're gonna be fine. Another feature that I mentioned earlier that the goggle has is a bright light cutoff. So if it notices a bright light for a minute at a time, the nod can turn off. We found this feature to be decently reliable in our testing, but I personally like to keep it off because I don't know what the threshold for bright light is for this device exactly. So I just don't want the device shutting off on me for what I would consider an unpredictable reason. So to turn that on or off, you just press this 5 times fast and it'll flash a green light slowly if it's on or quickly if it's off. Just refer to the manual for that. I personally just turn that off and I leave the individual tube shut off on. What tubes are in here? They are using NNVT 4 tubes and the FOM range is from 1400 to around 1500. These tubes are also not auto-gated, meaning that they don't pulse when there's a bright light source, but that does not mean the tube is not protected against bright light damage. So there's kind of a myth out there that, oh, if your tube's not auto-gated, as soon as you point at anything, it's just gonna blam and destroy your tube immediately. Auto-gating is simply one of the ways a tube can protect itself against bright light. Another one that the NNVT4 non-auto-gateds use is something called bright source protection, or BSP, and it's actually a really effective way of protecting the tube against the light. So what that does is it just basically, the tube automatically cuts the voltage down significantly. As a caveat of that, it does reduce the resolution more than an auto-gated tube, so it's a bit blurrier, but it protects it against light nonetheless. It's actually a really durable tube. There's been lots of testing out there, people, shining lasers, pointing their tube into the sun for short periods of time, and NNVTs tank it all pretty much. Now that being said, I wouldn't leave these in the open or point at the sun or point any lasers at them. It's your investment, it's still a lot of money, but obviously I wouldn't be afraid to use them either. Don't be worried about that stuff. Just because they're not auto-gated does not mean that they're not protected against bright light damage. All right, so now we're gonna put this on the Hoffman machine and bring this out to real world conditions with our camera rig to see how it performs stacked up against other similar devices. So here are the camera specs for our tests. We had to switch to the 16-35 GM lens here because the Jerry-14 lens and the Jerry-31 lens is not compatible with the standard lens adapter I normally use. But for full disclosure, let's get started with the Hoffman test, which we're going to start at 1 millifoot Lambert. The Hoffman can output a very fixed amount of light, so it's a great way of comparing tubes. And what we're looking for is how well the tubes resolve these lines, like an eye chart test, as the light levels decrease. If you've seen our previous videos, you're going to be very used to this test. We have the Jerry-31 on the left side of the video, all the way up to a PVS 14 with full Carson glass and a very nice Photonis green tube on the right side of the video, representing our highest performance end of the budget nod lineup we have here. So I apologize for the Jerry-31 having some shaky footage on some of the tests. With the Jerry-31 and the 14, they use proprietary glass, so the camera adapter doesn't fit perfectly as I'm holding the camera still. Given that they do use proprietary glass, I do think it performs quite admirably compared to the Optronics glass and the Carson glass in terms of light transmission and the clarity of the image. Now the Jerry-31 does have the lowest specs out of these 3 tubes, with the Photonis green phosphor leading the pack, with its higher contrast and better image overall, but I don't think you're losing any significant detection with the Jerry-31. Although in lower light conditions, obviously with better tubes, you're going to get better performance. But all things considered, price, form factor, the Jerry-31 performs quite well. Now the lower SNR here does not do the Jerry-31 any favors, and you're going to see a lot more scintillation or noise compared to the other 2 tubes, which is a factor when choosing for low light performance. As we dip down to the extreme low light, you can see that the Photonis holds the strongest out of the 3, whereas the Jerry and the other NNVT4AG are actually quite similar in performance, with the NNVT4AG coming out slightly higher due to a few more points in SNR, but as we go down to complete darkness, all 3 tubes will need supplemental illumination to see anything. Low light performance and detection are only one aspect of measuring a night vision system. Another one is going to be the performance of the lens itself, especially when it comes to things like distortion. So in this reference chart, we're looking for A, which is going to be a flat and neutral image. B is what we call barrel distortion, which you see most often with fisheye lenses, and in my opinion is extremely undesirable. C is pincushion distortion, and you see this with zoom lenses. Most nods have a little bit of pincushion distortion. It's not too noticeable, but if it gets really bad, it can create a weird tunneling effect on your images. And D is the least desirable, and that is going to be mustache or wavy distortion, which is a combination of the two. So we load up the distortion chart on the Hoffman machine here to see how well they render these lines. In this case, the Jerry was actually really impressive. It does produce a very flat image with very little distortion. There is a little bit of pincushion distortion on the edges, which is normal for any convex glass, but the Jerry does really well here. I would consider this an extremely flat and distortion-free image in all accounts. Budget glass tends to have a problem with controlling distortion, and you can see this with optronics glass. Now, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend an OE14 to someone who just wants to get started with nods, but if you're looking for something that has less distortion, the Jerry glass definitely has less distortion than the OE glass. The OE glass does have much more pin cushioning around the edges, and the lines and squares are not rendered as straight. Now, compared to the Carson 14 glass, which I consider the king, mil-spec 14 glass is going to be better, in my opinion, than the Jerry-31 glass. It has flatter lines and much better rendered images. However, you have to look at the cost. The Jerry-31 costs a fraction of what a Carson lensed Bino would cost in most cases, or what a Carson lensed mono would cost for the Jerry-14. So, in terms of cost, InfiRay did a wonderful job controlling the distortion of their lenses, and they produce very flat and pleasing images. Out of the labs and into the light, and we're going to start with our urban lighting test. We do this test because nods are often used in these environments, and they allow us to see how nods perform when there's lots of mixed lighting conditions and stressors on the tubes and glass. Off the bat, all three devices perform quite admirably. I can see into the dark areas perfectly fine, but the Jerry does have some considerations compared to the other two. You do notice the Jerry does produce a bit of a flatter image compared to the OE, which we discussed before, but it does seem to be struggling with a bit of the clarity of the image. And this is for a few reasons. First off, it does have the most modestly spec tubes out of the three, which is to be expected considering it's the cheapest device per eye compared to the other two. It also has bright source protection instead of auto gating, which means in these mixed lighting environments, it must drop more resolution compared to the other two to protect itself against bright light, especially compared to the Photonis, which is famous for their ultra-fast auto gating and their minimal resolution loss. The Jerry is also going to have a bit of chromatic aberration. Now, what's chromatic aberration other than a setting that you turn off in a video game? Chromatic aberration is caused when the lens disperses the different wavelengths of light and it manifests itself in fringing along the edges of things. Chromatic aberration is a bit more noticeable in the edges of the Jerry's image, as well in areas where there's lots of light to disperse. In lower light environments and in the center of the image, it's far less of an issue, but it's something that we thought we'd point out. Another thing I noticed when I was editing this video was going to be the distortion. So in the Carson and in the Jerry, you notice that building in the bottom left corner looks pretty flat. However, in the OE, it looks like it's slanted downwards. Now, it isn't in real life, and this is why distortion is important. It's very noticeable in urban environments, and the Jerry handles that very well. Now we're going to look at flare resistance. Flare resistance is a really important characteristic of any lens because it dictates how well you can resolve details in the presence of a strong light source. It can be as simple as a car headlight passing you, or it could be as complicated as OP4 setting up a photonic barrier trap for you and your team. The Jerry performs pretty admirably in this case. I would say that the flare resistance is a little better than the optronics. The halos are going to be slightly more pronounced. It does have less of these distracting elements. The Carson is really famous for having excellent flare resistance, and it's known to be the best amongst pretty much all brand of night vision lenses, so there's not really much of a comparison there. One thing to note is going to be the auto-gating pulse on the NNVT4AG. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with flare resistance, but it does have something to do with what kind of tubes that you want. So, a lot of people ask for auto-gating tubes, I would as well, but one thing that auto-gating can cause is these distracting pulses, especially in the case of NNVTs, which don't have as fast of an auto-gating frequency as the Photonis tubes. These pulses, as you can see, are pretty distracting in these light conditions and can sometimes be more distracting than the lens flares themselves. While the NNVT4 in the Jerry doesn't have auto gating and it has to drop resolution, I would consider this image to be a lot better because of that, even though it may be blurrier. If one were to pause and look at the intimate details, it does have less of these distracting seizure-like elements. So we've taken these 3 devices out to the forest for some testing. Now there is no more canopy, winter is coming here in Canada, so all the leaves have fallen. However, the devices are still scintillating and we're giving them a bit of a chance to flex their muscles. In this case, the Jerry-31 is going to have a lot less chromatic aberration, and that's because there is a lot less light sources for light to disperse and cause that fringing. So if you're using these in rural environments or in the forest, chromatic aberration isn't really going to be much of an issue compared to in urban environments. The Jerry-31 also has excellent light transmission. The image is quite bright and the details are rendered decently. Now they aren't as good as the PBS-14 standard or the mil-spec 14, but considering the price point, it performs perfectly adequate. Now, is this adequate enough for you? I'm going to leave all these tests here for you guys to figure that out and make that decision for yourselves. So the Jerry-31. Is this not for you? And I think for a lot of people, this is going to be a really compelling device. It comes in under the cost of pretty much every single one of our other binocular housings. The performance is pretty decent. The glass is good enough for most people. And if you're doing something that isn't life-saving or doesn't require professional use, like you're just going airsofting, you're just shooting casually at the range, you're just taking some hike with your friends, these are pretty great. They have a lot of features. They have articulation, manual gain with an amazing UI, better than most nods. In fact, I kind of wish this UI wasn't every nod. They have individual tube shutoff, programmable features, IPD stops. They're lightweight. They have decent lenses, built-in lens covers. They come with a manual spec sheets in a case. So they kind of come with a little bit of everything. And because they come as a pretty complete package out of the box with a lot of features, I do think that this night vision device is great for beginners or people looking to get their feet wet with nods, or people that just want a device that kind of does a little bit of everything. We do have a huge selection of devices. If you guys need any help with those, just let us know, send us an email or call us. And with that, Jerry-31. Pretty compelling device and a really cool feature-rich little nod. I actually really like them. Have a good day, everybody.